That's all right. It's all right.
How you doing?
All right.
Tight seating there.
All right. Never apologize. How did you do? What did you think? Better? We all do. We all do.
That's a hard. That's a hard because I mean, if it doesn't work, we'll have a third.
Hi.
Get picked by.
My dear. I didn't see you. See you, Andrew?
Okay, I did video today too.
You're still standing? They're tough, huh?
Hour and a half. What time is it?
They're tough, huh?
I'm going to show them a movie. Instead of my last session, which is a spectacular movie made in the 1970s by a German director called Werner Herzog. And it's called Aguirre, The Wrath of God. Aguirre is this Spanish conquistador who literally went insane. It begins with an enormous fog. You can't see anything. And suddenly, something bright. You see through the fog. And it starts to clear. And it's an enormous bronze cannon, which the Spaniards are lowering from this side of the Andes into the Amazon. Which is when he decides to go conquer Iran. And of course, Aguirre is Klaus Kinski, who's not the beginner. Absolutely insane. Natasha Kinski's father. You know who Natasha Kinski is? Do you know who Natasha Kinski is? No?
Movie star?
Movie star.
Teach us.
He's here.
She's
One of-
crazy to me.
One of the sexiest European movie stars.
Oh,
I can tell by the way you said it,
she's a movie star.
sweetheart.
Paris, Texas.
In
You see that?
1970, I was in high school.
Well, you didn't look at sexy movies?
I did. I was a sex.
Did you see Paris, Texas?
One of my students.
These guys are too serious. These people are really academic. Did you see Paris? Anyway,
I don't see that movie.
sure.
I'm not a big fan of Hollywood.
You're not a big fan of Hollywood? Well, this is Hollywood. Paris, Texas was a really wild independent thing.
Was it?
He said she was
That's what I see more of.
Anyway, so these conquistadors fought by declaring war on Charles III Constantine, declaring himself emperor. And killing everybody on the grass in the Amazon. And in the end, last scene is he's giving lectures to a dozen monkeys that are on his lap as they sail into the canyon. Okay, I thought that would be a nice metaphor for the future of the Amazon.
Theater in Morale.
Good evening, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. I'm Raul Prabhakar, and I'm a student at Harvard College. It is my great honor to introduce our panel tonight. Some members of my generation grew up with posters of Britney Spears and Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods on their walls. I actually had a poster of our two guests tonight.
You had a date yet?
And when I was growing up, I was one of those kids that watched Meet the Press. And I remember watching both of these gentlemen. I got hooked. I went out and rented the documentary, The War Room, the inspiring story of the 1992 presidential campaign, featuring tonight's guest. And our first guest is known as the Raging Cajun. But his wife, and Republican strategist, refers to him as Serpent Head. He has managed more political campaigns than any other American and became a household name in 1992 when he helped elect a little-known governor from Arkansas named Bill Clinton. He is a native, okay. He is a native of Louisiana, a vivid and prolific author, as well as a political commentator on CNN. He lives in Virginia with his famous wife, Mary Matlin, and 2 daughters. And joining him is his fast-talking Texan partner, who also served as chief strategist for the 92 Clinton-Gore campaign. He went on to serve as White House counselor to President Clinton. And he's the author of a best-selling book, Is Our Children Learning? The Case Against George W. Bush. Many of you have watched him on CNN, where he has verbally destroyed countless GOP talking heads with his brilliance and sharp wit. He lives in Virginia with his wife and 4 boys. Together, their latest book is Take It Back, Our Party, Our Country, Our Future, in which they offer an aggressive vision against the Republican tactics of division, distraction, and diversion. Please welcome James Carville and Paul Begala.
So, good job.
And hosting tonight's discussion is Kennedy School professor Elaine Kamarck. Elaine has worked closely with both James and Paul. In her work as one of the founders and leaders of the New Democratic Movement, and when she served as a senior advisor in the Clinton White House. Elaine also served as a senior policy advisor during the Gore campaign in 2000. You remember, the campaign Gore would have won if the Supreme Court let us count all the votes. Please welcome Elaine Kamarck.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, son. Take care. I want to thank you, all of you, for joining us tonight. It's Democrats' night at the Kennedy School. Yes. I want to give a special greeting to Senator Bob Graham and his wife Adele. Thank you for being with us. And also to Mara Whalen, who has provided some of the fun for tonight. Those of you who've been in my classes know that I talk about American political parties in a very scientific way. I talk about them as great, big, extended families. Like most American families, they're pretty dysfunctional. Okay? Sometimes they barely talk to each other. Sometimes they actually try to kill each other. But sometimes they sit down and they actually try to work out their problems. That's where the Democrats are today. People are having frank discussions about where the Democrats have been, what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong, and leading that discussion are 2 of my favorite cousins in the Democratic Party, James Carville and Paul Begala. Now, let me say a bit about both of them. I have always wanted to spend Fat Tuesday with James Carville. Now, James is a famous Louisianan, and I know that he knows exactly where to go, what to do, what to drink on this last day of Mardi Gras. But frankly, I always thought I would like to spend it with him in New Orleans. Instead, here we are in Cambridge. It is not exactly the Mardi Gras capital of the world. It's more like the Birkenstock capital of the world. And James, don't expect to see any bare breasts in this crowd. And I always love to see my old friend Paul Begala, but ever since the 2000 presidential campaign, I cannot look at him without thinking of his virtuoso performance as Governor George Bush in our debate preps for the 2000 debates. And Paul, if Al Gore had played as good an Al Gore as you played a George Bush, we might have had a different outcome. Okay, so anyway, tonight we've got a lot to say. The title of the forum is How and Why Democrats Must Win. I don't think we're going to actually talk a lot about the why. There's only 34% of the people in this country tonight who think this administration is doing a good job. Instead, let's talk about the how. Their new book, Take It Back, is a plea for Democrats to get some backbone, and it's about time. Now, I'm a pretty conservative Democrat. I was a founding member of the DLC. I'm a practicing Roman Catholic. I expect to see you at Mass tomorrow. But I endorsed Howard Dean in 2004. I just followed my heart. My friends in Washington were completely apoplectic. They thought I had lost my mind. What had happened was I was looking for some backbone. And at that time, he was one of the few who had it, since Senator Graham, unfortunately, was no longer in the race. Because Senator Graham was right about everything. So I heartily agree with the prescriptions in this book. I know in my heart where these guys are coming from, and I want to turn it over to them for a couple questions and then open it to our students here. And James, let me start with you. What happened to this party? Why did it lose its backbone? And was it inevitable that in a post-9/11 world, the party that was out of power when this happened would go through a period of sort of confusion and hesitancy?
Well, let's start with what happened in the party. There are a lot of charges that are made against the Democratic Party that are ridiculous and asinine. We're not patriotic, or my favorite is, we're not fiscally responsible. But there is one, and I think Senator Graham will back me up on this, there is one that causes everybody to wince, that has a little too much truth to it. And that is, too often the Democratic Party acts like an accumulation of interest groups more than it acts like a national party. And so what that breeds is candidates that go out and they speak, and if you go to watch a Democratic speech, is you listen to a litany. I stand for a woman's right to choose, a student's right to a good education, a person's right to breathe clean air, whatever. And I used to give the litany, and at the end I'd say, and I stand for the transgender amendment to the Constitution of these United States. People would laugh, well, there's no such thing, but it sounds like something we'd be for anyway. I mean, it's a perfectly... So the party becomes a party of litanies. They're a party of narratives. Right. You know, I was drinking, I was transformed by the power of Jesus Christ and transformed by 9/11, and I'm going to protect you from the terrorists in Tehran and the homos in Hollywood. I mean, it's all whatever, but you can understand what they're saying. And we're out talking like some Roman senator about, and the people say, well, the Democrats don't have any ideas. The truth of the matter is we have too many. We have a 7-point program for everything. All right? I'm serious. It's anything that you have. And you go on, and first we need to do this, then we need, and no one can remember anything. It is just a huge yawn.
Now, let me throw it over to you, Paul. One of the items in that litany is always abortion rights. Mm-hmm. And you all make a very interesting argument in your book. I think a lot of Democrats think, oh, we're winning on that issue. And you have a little different take. Can you talk about it?
Yeah, I mean, anybody who's kind of been out in the, well, or didn't have to go out, go read Tom Frank's book about Kansas. What's the matter with Kansas? One of the things he keeps coming across, and I grew up in Texas, James grew up in Louisiana, is we lose a lot of elections on abortion, and it's not because the country is pro-life in that they want to outlaw abortion. They're not where President Bush is. They're not where the Republican Congress is. But we, the Democrats, have allowed them to force us to fight on fairly narrow terrain where the country is resolved against us, so-called partial birth abortion, principally. The majority of Democrats support banning partial birth abortion, so-called. The majority of Democrats in the Congress voted to ban it. I mean, this thing is over. And it is a part of the federal law. And one of the things we argue is that the Democrats ought to recognize that and then move the debate to where we have the majority. Most Democrats are pro-choice. Most Americans are pro-choice. Why aren't we debating that, particularly at a time when President Bush is stacking the federal judiciary with people who have sworn to overturn Roe versus Wade, except when they're under oath in the Senate? And then they pretend they've never had an opinion. We could easily do that. And I don't think it's an abandonment of principle. I think that you have to recognize the reality that there's a consensus in this country for real restrictions on abortion. So-called partial birth, some kind of parental involvement, probably a couple of other things. And after that, for the sort of fundamental right, there's a 55, 57%, every poll for 20 years, majority on the basic Democratic position. And yet we never have a debate about that. Mm-hmm. No one ever stands up to President Bush and says, just where would you station the abortion police, sir?
Yeah.
Right? Because we're always fighting over here on the marginalia. And I think this is part of James's point about the interest groups. We had 9 candidates for president this last time around. Some who had been pro-choice all of their careers. Some, like Dennis Kucinich, who had been hardcore pro-life until 5 minutes before he ran. Others, like Dick Gephardt, who had been the most pro-life candidate, but have gradually, over 20 or 30 years in the Congress, had moved to the pro-choice position. Every single one of those 9 pledged to overturn the federal ban on so-called partial birth abortion. That's a 15% issue, 15% popularity. And yet 100% of our candidates had that position in the primary process. That's a party whose interest groups are pulling them and showing too much power, and it looks weak. It makes you look weak. Now, Republicans have their interest groups too, but like the NRA, President Bush broke with the NRA theoretically on their biggest issue, the assault weapons ban. He pretended like, and he said, that he would support continuing the ban on assault weapons. The NRA did not make him come to a convention. They did not make him fill out a questionnaire. They did not make him jump through hoops. They said, you're our guy. You're better than the other side. We want you. And you need to take a pass on some crazy positions of ours? Fine, you do that. You just go out there and win, Georgie boy. And that's just a smarter set of interest groups. I'm sorry, they play the game better.
Better behaved. Let me move back to you, James. I'll go back and forth. This fall, Iraq. We've got a president with very low approval ratings. And we've got actually a fair number of Iraq and Afghan veterans of this war running as Democrats for congressional seats. But I think the party as a whole is grasping, how do we handle Iraq? Can we just go out and say it's that guy's mess? Or do we have to actually come up with something?
But be glad, we should come up with something. Come up with something. Everybody said, you know what? The reason that the Democrats have not been able to come up with a good plan in Iraq? Because there is none. If somebody had one, they would step out right now and come forward with it, all right? So the idea is let me get this straight. By his own momentum, he starts this war, there's not one documented time that he ever asked a question that what would happen after the war. And then the chin-scratching community is the Democrats need to offer a solution on Iraq. Well, there ain't none. It is a mess beyond comprehension. Senator Graham correctly, as I might pointed that out. So, and then you have people saying, well, the Democrats should be, there's a poll now that the troops, like only 23% of the troops, and that was that big, the troops say we're doing fine. No, the troops understand what has happened. My own personal thing is, you don't want to be a country, don't be a country. Have 3. Call a conference on partition and get Shiistan in the south, Kurdistan in the north, and Lebanon in the middle, and to hell with it. I'm serious. Well, I mean, if they don't want to have an Iraq, why? And Bush never understood. And Paul, on the Super Bowl, before the invasion, this was like February 1st on a March 17th invasion, Bush did not know there were Shias and Sunnis and Kurds in Iraq. Right. All right?
That's true.
Now, how massive of negligence is that? You couldn't make this up. And he kept insisting. What was the story? You tell me.
There was a story, David Phillips's book, which I'm sure many of you have read, who was an advisor to the Coalition Provisional Authority. He's not a Democrat. He said that he was organizing expatriate Iraqis who wanted a revolution, wanted an American invasion. The president wanted a photo op at the Super Bowl, and so Mr. Phillips picked these 3 or 4 Iraqis, one of whom came back to him with eyes like this and said, he has no idea. He thinks everybody's an Iraqi. He has no idea that there are Sunni Arabs and Shia Arabs and Kurds. And this is somebody who desperately wanted us to invade, and he was scared to death. Now, again, I mean, I can't let it pass because Senator Graham is here. Adele, he must be insufferable at home if he's as right at home as he was in the Senate, because he's more right about more things than anybody. And had this country listened to Bob Graham, had my party listened
never
to Bob
forget
Graham, we
that.
wouldn't be in this mess.
That's right.
But first, give him a round of applause. Seriously, he was. But here's the risk. Here's the risk. Look, I mean, we're two state school chumps. I mean, I couldn't have gotten into Harvard on a bet, okay? But we were right about the war. We knew it was a disaster and said so every day on our little cable show. But here's the problem for Democrats. I told you so is not a winning message.
Okay.
Okay? We
That's an
can't.
interesting question.
But I think what Democrats can do, since this is a congressional election, we're not running for Secretary of Defense here.
Right.
And I don't expect the guy who's a challenger for the Senate in Scranton, Pennsylvania, to be sitting there deploying troops, you know, between Basra and Baghdad. And I don't think the voters do. I think it's enough to simply say it is the job of the Congress to ask tough questions. My favorite Republican senator these days is Rick Santorum. Santorum is out there. He's running from Bush now like the devil runs from holy water, okay? He votes with President Bush 98% of the time. Okay, now, you know, if two people agree on anything 98% of the time, one of them's not necessary. But now he's running. I mean, it's just stupid. I mean, y'all don't agree 98% of the time, I'm sure, right? But now he says this, get this. This is his solution to Iraq. Well, I want an independent commission to ask tough questions. Well, we have one. It's called the United States Senate. And I think this notion of rubber stamp Republicans on Iraq is going to hurt them.
Okay.
If Democrats simply say, look, I'm going to do the way Bob Graham did. I'm going to ask tough questions like, do we have enough troops? General Shinseki says no. Do we have enough firepower, enough manpower, enough allies, enough armor? And the Republican Congress is who's on trial right now. We'll get to the White House in 2008, but I think that it's enough I think Jay's right. We can't solve the problem, but we
Okay,
can certainly say we'll do a different job handling it.
Let's go on this midterm, because a lot of people are also saying that we need to nationalize the midterm, okay? And that everybody's got a different idea. Now, our very own Greg Wilson here has a wonderful bumper sticker. It's called Cronyism, Corruption, and Katrina, which sounds to me like a pretty good start. But the real question is, do you all think that we need to nationalize this, or should we let each Democrat run his or her individual race?
Well, first of all, as a Democrat, we don't have any control over what a Democrat does. But the idea that there's some like grand thing telling a guy in Indiana, you got to do this, you know, it just don't happen like that. I think the country this election is completely nationalized. And the whole thing is Paul said, and every Democrat is going to run their rubber stamps. And actually, for a midterm, I'm not sure that you need much more than that. That, you know what? I'm not going to go. You're not going to pay me to agree with anything 98% of the time, and that's what my opponent does. And this is why we got in the mess we in. But some different candidates are going to do different things. But there's no sort of grand Democratic council that sits there and sort of issues edicts and encyclicals that, you know what I mean, Democratic candidates paying attention to.
This is true.
But right now, look, I mean, this guy, they've been in power. Since they've been in power, they've lost a $5 trillion surplus, an American city, and a war. What's left? Nail something down before they lose something else. I don't know what the hell's left for them to lose.
Okay.
I mean, damn.
Whoa. Moving right along, okay?
But you're right. The Democrats don't have a good solution for Iraq. We don't.
Okay, moving right along. Let me ask you about the presidential maneuvering. You know, on the Republican side, they kind of run more than once, and they tend to get a little practice, and it looks like John McCain has got the kinks out of his act and is looking to run again. We don't seem to do that. We seem to take our candidates and throw them overboard. What would you say of the prospects of a Kerry or a Gore comeback?
Not great. I always presume everybody's going to run. You know, Mo Udall said it. He said the cure for presidential ambition is formaldehyde. It's just like, and Mo knew. I mean, he was a candidate, you know. I think, so I always presume they're all going to run. And I think that's good. This is going to be the most interesting presidential election of our lifetime for a couple of reasons. The last time we did not have an incumbent president or vice president on the ballot was 1952. Okay, I'm 44. I've been voting in presidential elections since 1980. Every single presidential election that I've voted in has had a Clinton or a Bush on the ballot. Somewhere. Every single one. Okay, so it's going to be the most interesting, because it's going to be completely wide open. I think on the Republican side, what's interesting about Senator McCain is he is moving right. He's going to be unrecognizable to all of us, like in the media, who are they take away your press credentials if you don't kiss John McCain's ring. Trying to clean it up here. I'm trying to give up cursing for Lent. It starts tomorrow. I want to try to
It's
wrap
really
my mind
hard.
around it. Okay, but watch this. He is moving so far to the right to try to court the very kooks that he fought with in 2000. The Bob Jones University crowd, the Falwell crowd, the Robertson crowd. Get this, as my friend Rick Santorum is disavowing his longtime support for the teaching of intelligent design, McCain endorsed it. John McCain wants to teach my kids intelligent design in the schools. Now, why is he saying that? I don't know. Maybe, he's had a complete conversion. Or maybe he's going for the Falwell-Robertson wing of his party. And that's what's happening. And it's going to be interesting to see if the press calls him on it.
Okay.
And I suspect they won't.
Now, you guys wrote this whole book on taking the party back. So you don't have to name names, but paint me a picture of our ideal savior for the 2008 presidentially.
That assumes that you sort of say, well, you get somebody that is, first of all, has a backbone, is tough, all right, and someone that's competent, that has political skills, and it's again, so much of the debate we think is the wrong debate. That is ideological. We need to move the party to, and the one thing we do better than anybody is retreat. We have more retreats after an election. We retreat to everything, and everybody sits around the table. And everybody, and none of them know whether to, wind their butts or scratch their watches, but everybody is, and we move here and we got to have a more, the truth of the matter is that we're not strong enough. And instead of worrying about nuancing positions or whether somebody from the Northeast or you better off with somebody from the West or somebody, I'd rather have somebody competent, all right, from the Senate than an incompetent governor. And the way that you do that is you go out and you have primaries. The truth of the matter is that, you look back on the field and it was more people who should have run in 2004. All right? But that's if you misdiagnose the problem, I think you're doomed to come up with the wrong answer. I mean, no one is saying a party needs to be more liberal or anything like that. But what it needs to be is, and you're right, McCain, the Utah legislature, the Utah House is to the left of McCain. They voted 48-28 not to have this food. The 48 by a huge vote. And let's let them get out there and quit worrying about the perfect candidate, and let's see who can stand up and under this fire and not only can return some fire. I'm interested in not just somebody who can take a hit. I'm interested in somebody who can throw a punch. To tell you the truth, I want to see somebody can get back.
That's a great point.
I'm good. I mean, our candidates need to have a steel jaw, but they got to have a steel fist too. And this is a game. This is a thing of offense. The most delicious thing I've seen happen is that the Bush people have been so irresponsible with this war on terror as they actually now telling reporters this, we're trying to be responsible and nobody will pay attention to us on this Dubai Ports deal.
But I think toughness is the first thing I'm looking for. I want someone who's strong. And James's point, I'm a George S. Patton Democrat. Okay, General Patton said the purpose of war is not to die for your country, it's to make the other son of a bitch die for his country. Okay? We sit around in these retreats and we say, how do we respond? How do we respond? How do we respond? Well, fine, I'm for responding, but how about attacking? How about attacking? We had a convention in this city where our party had an edict that said, thou shalt not speak ill of the Republicans.
It was astonishing.
Go put up a sign at Fenway that says, please don't boo the Yankees. Right? I mean, it's insane. I mean, I'm like Alice Roosevelt Longworth. If you don't have something nice to say about someone, come sit here by me. I want to hear it. Okay? Let's get up and hit them. And it's like where and how. I mean, I feel like a mosquito in a nudist colony. Everywhere you pick, you're going to find a place to land. I mean, it's just like everything is screwed up. So I want somebody who will be tough, who won't be swift-boated.
Yes, good. We've come to that part of the evening. Come on, students, it's your turn. All right, line up. There's a microphone here, 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 and here. And let's just take a couple questions from the audience. And now we're going to stop right at 7 o'clock. So let's get your questions in. And
If you have a speech, just declare it a speech so I know. Because I'm not going to say you can't have free speech. Just say, I have a speech. I got 800 people listen to me. I want to do that. Otherwise, just ask the question.
And tell us who you are.
But
okay?
if it is a speech, I'll declare it for you.
Right here. Sorry.
Hi, this is not a speech. My name is Jenny. I had a question. In the 2004 presidential campaign, the Democratic Party seemed to be only appealing to the, shall we say, suburban middle class, so-called swing vote, when historically the Democratic Party has represented the forgotten man, the lower 80%. And I believe that this ignoring of this constituency cost the Democrats the election.
Borderline speech.
That's my question.
Speech.
Okay, so my question is, do you think that the survival of the Democratic Party depends upon the organizing of the forgotten man?
Well, first, the thing that most drew me to Bill Clinton was that he used to talk about the forgotten middle class, very much evocative of I guess it was Roosevelt who talked about the forgotten man. It's kind of sexist language today. But if you ask people in America, 96% of us think we're middle class. Okay? And so when Clinton finally, as a Democrat, stood up and said, I care about the forgotten middle class, it resonated. Why? Because he didn't define it in terms of socioeconomic status. He defined it in terms of values. Okay, because I traveled with him for 13 months. I mean, I had that speech memorized. It's still burned into my brain. He would say, I want to be a president who fights for the forgotten middle class, people who work hard and play by the rules and still fall behind. Okay, that's a compact. That's about values. And I think that's the way to get folks, rather than thinking strictly in terms of ideology or socioeconomic class. Why, this is a story we tell in the book. I'll try to shorten it. But my son and I, my oldest son, were driving through rural Virginia and saw an old trailer, and it had a brand new Bush Cheney sign on it. It's about a month before the election. So he's 12 at the time, and he turns to me and said, Daddy, you always say the Democrats are for the poor. They're clearly poor. Why are they for Bush and Cheney? And the standard intellectual Democrat elite analysis is, because they've had the wool pulled under their eyes. It's so patronizing. The bad, evil Republicans have fooled them, son. They've lied to them.
Right.
Okay? I think it's so patronizing. Bob Rubin is like richer than Jesus, richer than God, richer than anybody, right? He's the richest man in the history of humanity or something. He's really rich.
Really rich.
And he votes Democrat every single time. Why? Does anybody say, the Democrats have pulled the wool over his eyes? They've really fooled poor, ignorant, stupid Bob Rubin. Right? No. Why does Bob vote Democratic? I suspect it's because values matter more to him than the tax cuts he gets. He prospers from those tax cuts, but he believes our party reflects his values better. That's the same thing that couple in that trailer think. We can get them. We can get them. We can talk to them about values. Values don't begin and end, and religion doesn't begin and end with gays and abortion. And 3,000 times in the Gospels, Jesus told us to take care of the poor. Never once did he beat up on the homosexuals. Now, maybe they didn't have homosexuality 2,000 years ago. I don't know. But I bet you they did. And we can talk to those folks. And it breaks my heart. Those are our people. I grew up with them, so did James. We don't have to win all of them. We can win a lot of them. And that's what Clinton taught me. He went right to them and talked to them, and he won them back.
Great.
Go
ahead.
To make a point here, people say, what is the difference between Republicans and Democrats? And this is what should be the difference. Republicans are always willing to take on people in the interests of power. Democrats should never be afraid to take on power in the interests of people. And time again, you've...
Well said. Right here.
Hi, my name is Melanie Rowe, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. And I'm interested in your opinion of what you see as the role of the head of the party and how you think Howard Dean is fulfilling that role.
you know, the role of the head of the party is, basically it's a fundraising organization that keeps these state parties going. It's not, the head of the Democratic Party, particularly when you're out, unless it's as a spokesperson, which is the sort of chief thing, is that there's way too much belief that the Democratic Party in Washington has any influence out in the rest of the country. Trust me. You know, what do I think of the DNC? Rarely ever think of the DNC, to tell you the truth. I haven't thought about it enough to form an opinion. But I think that what happens here with Governor Dean is, A, the fundraising's not going well. And that's kind of why they're there. But for that, why do you exist? And I hope that they do something to get their fundraising going. And the other thing is that the kind of first rule of a party chair is don't get into trouble or be controversial, create trouble for the other guys. My sense is that Governor Dean is creating more trouble on our side than he's creating on the Republican side. I think he's a good guy. I think he's done some admirable things, but you know what? The real measure, and I hate to say this, but the real measure is how much money you raise it. Because that's what's going to get out to these state parties. That's what's going to get the vote out. That's what's going to make the difference. That's where the rubber hits the road. The position in itself doesn't have any real power. And I faulted and got into trouble for this, but I said that the idea that we leave the selection of a party chair open to 50 different party chairs is ridiculous. It's supposed to be rigged. Okay, you get the people together and say, okay, this is our guy. And you find out who the fundraisers are going to respond to, who the people are going to do this, and the people in the Senate and the House. And who cares? I got all these, you don't believe the Democrats are democracy or whatever. I don't care if they rigged the election for the party chair. I really don't.
Up here.
I'd like to, my name is Sridhar Prasad. I'm a student at the law school. I'd like to ask about that values discussion that you were just mentioned a minute ago. Brad Carson, immediately after the 2004 election, wrote a fascinating piece for the New Republic in which he said, I'm a Democrat in Oklahoma, and I beat John Kerry by 15 points, and I still lost to Tom Coburn in the Senate, who is
stone crazy.
Yeah, who's insane, and a 6-year senator. Right. Given that, is it possible, when we talk about take it back or take back the party, take back the country, how do we talk to people where the values are so much of a stumbling block that they just choose someone like Coburn or someone like a lot of candidates that we all know about compared to someone who we think would be more competent?
Yeah, first off, you have to talk about them. You can't ignore them. Okay? You wouldn't hire somebody for a job who wouldn't speak to you. You wouldn't hire somebody for a job who was afraid of you. Too many Democrats are afraid to talk about values. I think it's a huge mistake. Second, spread the field. Redefine values. I mentioned that a moment ago. Okay? And third, if it is true to you, nobody should try to be a phony about it. But I mean, John Kerry is a person of profound religious faith, and yet he was caricatured by some on the fringe right as somebody who lacked faith. I think that was tragic. But the solution to that is to give voice to your faith. The thing that probably, we put this in the book too, that really bothered me maybe the most, the worst moment of that campaign, was when the Republican National Committee put out a flyer in West Virginia and Arkansas. And it was paid for by the RNC. They didn't even bother to get the Swift Boat guys to do it. They put their own name on it, and it said, if Democrats win, they will ban the Bible. That's what it said. We will ban the Bible. Now, do you know what the Kerry Edwards campaign did to respond? This is great. Nothing. Worse than nothing, they put out a press release by John Edwards asking President Bush to please stop. Please stop being so mean to us. Please stop being so... That was it. Now, 1 million people saw the flyer. Nobody saw the press release. I didn't even know it existed until I was doing research for the book. Now, ask yourself, what would Clinton do? Right?
Right up here.
He'd have killed him. No, he'd have been out there holding up the family Bible in Morgantown, right? I may need this book more than anybody in this room. Right? I will never let them take your Bible away from you. Right? And by the way, they are violating the 8th commandment, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. They're lying to you, friend. They are lying to you. Right? My God, he'd have won them over. So you got to talk to them.
Hi, my name's David Fogelson. I'm a second-year student here at the Kennedy School. And it seems to me that the Republicans, or the Democrats, keep looking at this as how badly can Republicans lose before we start to win. And it seems to me also that the Republicans have three major things that the Democrats don't, which is leadership, unity, and vision. So I'm wondering, how do you propose that the Democrats will be able to overtake Republicans in achieving those three main characteristics, which I believe are important to winning upcoming elections?
First of all, I would seriously question that they have vision. I do think they have unity, leadership in terms of taking the country in a direction they had, it's pretty much in a ditch. But I mean, but I don't think they have any vision, the foggiest idea of what to do now, on anything. I think that, again, and the Democrats, to go back to what the Democrats need to do is, my favorite solution is a chapter in the book where they talk about progressive patriotism. And appeal to people's sense that they want to do something for their country. And it's a country where people like myself we're not going to be able to have a tax break that we had under that. People in the middle class, you may have to add 4 months to the retirement age. You might have to have a COLA adjustment. You may not be able to drive as big a SUV or truck as you want to. It's time everybody get a little skin in the game here. Poor people, you may have to stay in school longer, and you may have to not get pregnant so young. We've tried 14-year-olds having babies, and frankly, the results are not too good. And we need somebody to say that. But what we're not going to do is ask people to shop, and we're not going to say that this country is going to move ahead by asking just one segment of it to sacrifice. And what the Democrats need to say is every man for himself is the last command of a failed ship captain. And that is the Republican mantra. That is their vision, every man for himself. The first command of a resolute, successful captain is all hands on deck. And this is a country that understands that we're ready to get on deck. And people are ready to, and you appeal to people. My grandmother was a 5-star mother in World War II. And if Franklin Roosevelt would have tried to give her a tax break, she would have slapped his face. All right? And if they were sitting there and those boys didn't have the right ammunition, or their equipment wasn't working right in the Pacific or on D-Day, there would have been a revolt in this country. And the idea that somebody like me or Paris Hilton is getting an estate tax cut, and you got kids over here that don't have the right body armor, and somebody's not saying, there's something fundamentally wrong with this. Fundamentally wrong with this. And the idea that we're sitting here, we're paying for this war, or actually our children are paying for it if you want. We're asking our children to pay for our war. Then because we have no leadership on energy, no leadership on energy conservation, we're actually funding these tyrannical regimes who are giving these people money. It is nuts. And if somebody came to the American people and told them that, they would respond. And this president, in maybe one of the most shameful things the president ever done, he said, what could the American people do after 9/11 when 91% of the country were approving of him and the whole country wanted to come together? And his answer was to shop. This is a country that does not need encouragement to get to the shopping mall.
Right over here.
Hi, my name is Megan. I'm actually a member of the LaRouche Youth Movement. Before the 2004...
The what movement?
I'm a member of the LaRouche Youth Movement.
Okay.
I have a question.
All right.
Before the 2004, for the presidential elections, most of the candidates chose not to highlight the criminal role of Vice President Cheney, saying that this would make Bush look bad in November. And this proved to be a tragic mistake. Now Cheney is the leading proponent in the administration of a war with Iran. So my question is, would you agree that now, before the 2004 elections, Democrats need to organize for nothing less than seeing Cheney removed from office before it's too late, before he invites leading Democrats hunting with him at the King Ranch?
Paul, you want to take this?
I don't know. I think Cheney is as much a symptom as a problem. I mean, I believe in focusing on the organ grinder, not the monkey. Now, I'm not quite sure which is which in this administration. I don't know. I mean, Elaine and I worked for the Clinton-Gore administration, where the vice president, I think at that point, was the most influential vice president in American history. If the reports are to be believed, Vice President Cheney even more influential. But I think it's better to take the fight to policies. I mean, what are we going to do? Okay, so Dick Cheney gets impeached or something, right? Then what happens? Well, then George Bush gets to pick another one. Okay, he's 0 for life on picking vice presidents. He's not all of a sudden going to get good at it. You know, so I think that it's far better to channel energy into talking about things Democrats believe in, talking about where we disagree with the Republicans, what we would do if we took back the House and the Senate, and in saying it in a way that people can actually understand. Part of my problem with our party, because I've been so rough on the Republicans, is that we listen too often to the pollsters and the focus groups, and they say this kind of baloney, phony, buzzword kind of stuff. You know, you look at like some of these kind of agendas that they put out, and it's like 21st century education for the new workforce, or whatever that means, and all this kind of buzzword. I think if Democrats stood up and said, look, we can do better. That's sort of the slogan they're toying with. I like that. My suggestion was, hell, we couldn't do worse. But, okay, we can do better. We need a new direction. And just say, you vote for us, there'll be no congressional pay raise until the budget's balanced. You vote for us, there'll be a minimum wage of $7 an hour. You vote for us, by the year 2020, we'll be energy independent from the Middle East. You know, you vote for us, and we're not going to be turning over our port security to the United Arab Emirates. You know, I mean, just simple, strong issues that relate to people's lives that we would change is a whole lot better. I'd take a backseat to nobody in my contempt for Dick Cheney, but I think that's not where the Democrats ought to go. I think they're much better served by focusing on issues.
The Senate, the same Senate that confirmed Samuel Alito is not going to convict Dick Cheney of some impeachment crime. I mean, maybe we change the Senate around, but right now we need to focus on more.
There may be a new Senate not too long. Right over here.
Thank you. That's a good segue to my question. My name is Elizabeth Rich, and I'm a student here as well as an employee. And first of all, congratulations on your book.
An employee here at Harvard? Or just
yes, okay. Yes. And good luck with your radical plan to Abramoff-proof politics. But it seems like there's been just so much talk and no action. And I have just sat in front of the television watching The Daily Show and Tim Russert and Bob Schiefert, and just want to scream, and I feel so powerless. And in the spirit of taking on power in interest, truly, before 2008, what would it take to get rid of this evil Washington empire?
Let me. I'm glad you asked that question. Or as we used to say in class, duh, would you repeat the question, please? No, you don't need to repeat it. There are two ways to look at this. Let me tell you, the Democrats are confused, and it's not yet resolved. And I'll tell you the same thing I tell Democrats around the country. Don't wait for them in Washington. You start it. Because the real change is going to come from without. Now, you look at it one of two ways. You can say, you can be an appleist. And so you know what, there's obviously a couple of bad apples in the barrel. We just remove the apples and everything will be fine. Or are you a barrelist? And you say, is there something wrong with the barrel that we're putting the apples in? All right? I'm a barrelist. I think that there's something wrong with the system there. And so then how far are you willing to go? Because right now, how many people here, this is Harvard University, okay? How many people can name one thing in the Democratic reform plan? One? Wait, what is the one?
They want 10 years, they want broadband for everyone.
No, Democratic political reform. In response, do you know, here we are at Harvard, 800 people, not one person knows a single thing that the Democrats want to do to clean up Washington. Now, if you don't know here, I mean, I'll tell you one, and you're going to be blown away by the boldness of this proposal. You're going to knock down, you're going to fall down. You have to wait 2 years instead of one before you can, if you're a member of Congress, he has a 2-year prohibition before you can start lobbying as opposed to one. Or this one, you can't use, ex-members can't use the House gym. Boy, let me tell you, that's going to straighten that mess out in a second. That'll get your attention.
Right up here. Young lady?
Now, don't you feel better? But you know what? If everybody here starts, I want to make a point here. If everybody here, if you're waiting for it to come from there,
Right.
ain't coming.
Don't do it.
Right. That's the. Remember, Pat Buchanan used to say this to his crowd. Don't wait for orders from headquarters. Mount up and ride to the sound of cannon fire. Okay? That's what you all. The Democrats, as Elaine pointed out, we're not a hierarchical party. Okay? We're much more of a grassroots party. Change always comes from y'all, not from Washington.
Right up here.
I have a specific question about change. My name is Megan Jacobs. I'm an undergraduate at Boston University. But I have a question about Paul Hackett, who, for anyone who doesn't know, is the first Iraqi war veteran to run for Congress. And I think he embodies exactly what you've been talking about as a strong fighting Democrat who is really unnuanced in his values and really uncompromising about his views. But he was pushed out of the Senate race by a lot of the insider Democrats. So I was wondering how much you know about that and what you think.
Well, I happen to know a lot. I think that Paul Hackett would tell you was the first person from Washington to go raise money for him in Ohio when he was running for the House seat, got the DCCC onto the race, and in fact met with him when after he had announced for the Senate. And he did. There is a point is that Sherrod Brown said he wasn't going to run, so Hackett got out there and run, and Sherrod Brown got in, and everybody decided, well, we're going to get behind him. He has a case. He's a good guy. I hope he doesn't. It did happen pretty much as I understand it, as he said it. Like I say, I went to Cincinnati and did a fundraiser for him long before anybody knew who he was, and I hope that he doesn't get discouraged, because I get discouraged sometimes with Democrats. I get discouraged myself sometimes. I hope he comes back, because I think he is a guy that has a lot to offer, and he does have a lot of courage.
Great. Over here?
Hi, my name is Andrew Miller. I'm an undergraduate here. There was a recent article in the New York Times that claimed that the Democrats were on the verge of overtaking a majority of governorships in the United States, and that governor seats might serve as kind of a starting point for building up democratic strategies, ideas, and proving kind of a place where Democrats could show their competence in governance. And the governors could kind of oversee democratic organization in key battleground states for 2008. Do you agree with the idea that governorships and Democrats on the state level could help reinvigorate the national party over the next few years?
Oh, sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's where Elaine's done as much work on this academically as anybody. I mean, who is it, Justice Brandeis that called them the laboratories of democracy?
Mm-hmm. And there's a whole book written on this called Laboratories of Democracy about the governors.
Right. So yes, and I think it's always been a good proving ground for both parties. You know, I have my favorite for 08, and she happens to be a senator who will be unnamed right now. No, I'm not going to be cute about it. 3 words, I'm for Hillary. Okay, period, I am. But as a general matter, governors do better at this stuff. Now, I think there are a few senators who can transcend that, and I think Hillary's one of them, in much the same way that Robert Kennedy would have won in '68 if he hadn't been murdered. And I think Hillary is somebody. But generally, yes, but we should take back all those governors, not just because they can grow up and become presidents, but because a whole lot of the rubber meets the road in state government. And if you look at what these Democrats in these states are doing, some of them are really fantastic.
That's where, you know, Clinton got a lot of his energy, right, and a lot of his ideas from his fellow governors. They didn't actually come from Washington. They really came from all those great Democratic governors we had during that period of time. Over here.
Hi, my name is Mark Linton, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. I wanted to ask a little bit more. You mentioned earlier you were talking about values. And in terms of moral leadership, it's Mardi Gras. It's been 6 months since Hurricane Katrina. You had a 75% chance of being African American, poor, and a renter if you lived in a flood-affected zone, and 80% of the city's African American population hasn't returned. If Democrats can't somehow mobilize energy around an issue that is so complex and connects to so many different issues they speak to, something like Katrina, how can they possibly carry forward with any kind of moral authority into the next cycle of elections and on any level of government, national, state, local?
I can't believe I'm getting ready to say this, but I'm going to try to get it out of my mouth. One of the best things that I've read on Katrina was a column in this week's Time magazine by Newt Gingrich and John Barry. And John Barry is the guy who wrote the story of the flood of 27. He's from New Orleans, a really good friend of mine. If you get, best not to get me cranked up and jacked up on this, because it's not a good idea. But what happened in New Orleans, well, first of all, it's hard to believe this. On a night that Katrina hit, the senior person in the White House dealing with it was the deputy to Francis Fargos Townsend. That I don't even know the name of the person. All right? Now, let me try to be rational here. The reason that it happened was the federal government had complete responsibility for the levees in Louisiana that broke. The levee boards have nothing to do with the construction, maintenance, or anything of those levees. The reason that the storm surge came up is that the United States, for its economic betterment, had levied the river and kept the river in its channel, which deprived Louisiana of the sediment to the wetlands that would have proved a buffer to this hurricane. The idea, it is in the economic interests of the United States, profound economic interests of the United States. I think it's the largest port in the country. Everything in the middle of the country that goes out of the country, you got to have a port, an exit point at the southern part of the river to transfer stuff from barges to these ships that go out. All right? And the idea that and what they want is, I don't want to get too complex on this, but it has to do with the allocation of revenues from all. They need $40 billion over 10 years, and it'd be fine. And it could have, and they said, well, it's below sea level. Rotterdam is 20 feet below sea level. They have 3 levees. They're not going to lose Rotterdam because a levee burst. They're not going to do that. And so you ask yourself, we live in a country that we told that a levee is going to withstand a Category 3 hurricane. It's barely a 2 over the southern part of Lake Pontchartrain, and their answer is, well, the mayor and the governor could have done a better job. Well, why in the hell do you have a federal government if it's not for something like that? Just disband the whole damn thing. If you can't respond or you can't build a levee to protect the people that live behind it for the economic self-interest of the country. I could take Washington, D.C. and move it to Richmond tomorrow, and it wouldn't matter. You don't need a city on that part of the Potomac. You can't do without a city on that part of the Mississippi. And the moral obligation of the United States, not to mention the economic self-interest of the United States to do this, and they're sitting there talking about whether or not the governor did this or they had the school buses over there. It don't have a damn thing to do with it.
That's exactly
And I give Gingrich credit, and John Barry, who I give a lot of credit to a lot of things for. If you want to read one of the best books on American history you'll ever read Rise and Tide. But understand the economic self-interest that they have. And the deal was, and read about Louisiana loses more land in a year than the island of Manhattan. And guess what? When you lose land to water, the hurricane gets worse because the storm surge hits. I'm sorry, it's a good question. I didn't mean to get off on something, but it's
always
you hit a sore spot.
You hit a sore spot, and it's still so raw.
And I get so mad. And when I hear this stupidity, I just want to just get somebody and just jump on top and literally choke them.
Okay, but let me add one thing. The Democrats did a good job of holding the president's feet to the fire on that. They did a good job, and I'm forever banging on the Democrats for being too weak in Washington. Members of the Senate and members of the House and our party, I thought, did a very good job of making the president accountable for the role of the federal government and its failure there. So I think Democrats did do a good job of expressing
I'm not like mad at the...
No, I know, but that was the premise of your question.
I'm mad we can't get... that there's such a misunderstanding on every level about what happened to New Orleans and what happened in New Orleans. And when I hear people say, well, it's below sea level, a city 5 feet below sea level shouldn't be a real challenge to modern engineering in a Category 2 hurricane. We ought to be able to deal with that.
This gentleman gets the very last question. My apologies to everyone else.
All right, thank you very much, Professor K-Mark. I'm Anthony Guajardo. I'm a junior in the college, and I'm one of the few Republicans infiltrating this Democratic self-help session. So I just like to.
I have one that infiltrates my bed at night.
Yeah, I actually have a question because this is pretty relevant to what happened in your Louisiana community, and it's also relevant to Mr. Begala's talking about how the Democrats really are a religious party, and I'd just like to ask you with this question to prove it. President Bush, within the past 4 years, proposed a faith-based initiative in terms of funding religiously oriented nonprofit organizations, many of which work in African-American communities, such as Louisiana and New Orleans, and could conceivably help rebuild these communities. These communities would receive federal funds. You talk about the federal government needing to do more.
Yeah, question.
What's it?
Even though you're a Republican, I want to make you feel at home. You're still on the same rules that you got to ask a question.
Yeah, but my question is, why does the Democratic Party not support federal funding of faith-based initiatives? If it's unfaithful.
Hillary and Clinton and Joe Lieberman do.
Yeah,
Al Gore did.
Yeah,
Al Gore did.
Yeah, there's the devil in the details, okay? I mean, you got to be careful about crossing the line. But Democrats do support that in the main, and I think the president's heart is in the right place there. I worry sometimes about the execution on that. But I know that Lieberman and Hillary are co-sponsors of that thing.
Okay, we have come to the end of the evening.
All right, there we go. Happy Mardi Gras.
And I want to, here, wait, we got some more. I think that being Fat Tuesday and being that we all still feel for the citizens of New Orleans and wish them well, wish them well in the future, and maybe they'll get over some of this, we'd like to end this program with a little bit of celebration the way they do in New Orleans. Go ahead, guys.
There we go.
Don't forget the ones behind you.
Oh, yeah, back here. Here we go. Oh, whoa, a ricochet shot. Jeez. All right, here we go.
Right there.
Oh, good throw there. There we go. Oh, excellent. All right, thank you all very much.
Good night, everybody. Good night.
Senator, good to see you, sir.